where is this Colin guy actually coming from, and why did I dedicate so much to the whole weekend to this? Not the whole weekend, but like all of the time that I allot for, work, I spent on this. So why did I do that? It's because the PSL has this very peculiar ideology that comes from a guy named Sam Marcy. Now, Sam Marcy was a Trotskyite, and he helped found the Workers' World Party, and the PSL was a split from the Workers' World Party. So this is what's going on here. And the Marcyites were unique among Trotskyites in their more kind of unconditional support for actually existing socialist states. Now, mind you, a lot of Trotskyites support actually existing socialist states. They just call them deformed worker states or whatever. But Marcy much more strongly emphasized kind of third world socialism, third world. And it was just kind of part of this Trotskyite outlook where the Trotskyite class analysis was applied, so they thought, right, on the international stage. So if you want to know what the Trotskyite class analysis was, Trotsky believed that Trotsky believed that the primary force to lead revolution in terms of masses are like the most marginalized and the poorest and the most vulnerable population, and that's basically to where it borders on kind of lumpen territory, basically the most dependent and vulnerable parts of society as the vehicle of revolution. And the dynamic that Trotskyism creates is you have, on the one hand, a very kind of conceited bourgeois intellectual class, and then on the other hand, you just have like the most vulnerable, most oppressed sections of society. Now, Marxism-Leninism differs from that in a multitude of ways. Marxism-Leninism begins with the leadership of definitely a leadership of a strong kind of intellectual strata. But what the intellectual strata within the paradigm of Marxism-Leninism does is it creates working class institutions that are a vehicle for training and educating people. So instead of gatekeeping, you're kind of allowing even the lowest common denominator to have a path to rise through the ranks. Another thing that's different about Marxism-Leninism is it contains a profound faith in the middle strata in ways that Trotskyism doesn't. So for Lenin, this was his faithfulness to the middle strata of the peasants, the reliable middle strata, right? The moderate peasants, basically. That's kind of also the base of Stalin. And then during the years of the Popular Front, the view became orthodoxy that, we need to rally the middle classes. We need to rally the small petty bourgeoisie as well. And the proletariat should assume the leadership, of course, but there needs to be a deal that's made, you need to work with the middle strata. You need to work with those sections of society that are not necessarily going to be completely dependent on you, but which represent a more kind of authentic and organic orientation of society in general. So for Lenin, the middle strata of the peasants had a degree of independence because there was a democratic petty bourgeoisie that was among them. And they had democratic aspirations. And Lenin was coming and saying, we need to tap into that base and, start a dialogue with them. That's going to be the vehicle of the revolution in Russia, is an alliance between the proletariat and the middle strata of the peasants. Now, Trotsky hated this. Trotsky hated this idea of an alliance between the proletariat and the peasantry. Trotsky believed that you should just only have the most, even in terms of his understanding of class politics, of proletarian class politics, he believed that only the most vulnerable, most dependent sections of society should be brought to the fore, in terms of the base that you're going to rely on. And what's so conniving and manipulative about that is that you're not leaving any room for proving the correctness or the truthfulness of the conceits of the intellectuals, because these vulnerable people are just going to follow whatever you say and whatever you do because they're desperate, not necessarily because in their own way and on their own terms they've arrived at its essential truth, just in a different form, obviously. And it's pretty stark. For example, in the 1930s, and you're going to see this on X a lot, Trotsky himself said that the base of fascism wasn't actually the ruling imperialist bourgeoisie, but it was actually the petty bourgeoisie and the middle class. So this idea that the petty bourgeoisie is fascist and it's, the fascism comes from the middle class, that is actually something that comes from Trotsky. That was Trotsky's analysis. Trotsky hated the masses. He hated the masses. He hated the people. He was just, all he wanted was a dictatorship of antisocial bourgeois intellectuals and extremely desperate people who are the lowest section of society, who, are going to follow whatever the leader says because they're desperate and, they don't have time to really think about it in their own way, right? So that is kind of the proto-fascism inherent in Trotskyism, because fascism does the same thing, but explicitly for the lumpen, right? It's this kind of degenerate bourgeoisie mobilizing the lumpen, and that's the kind of relationship entailed by fascism. Now, why am I talking about Trotsky in relation to this Colin guy and the PSL and Sam Marcy? Because Sam Marcy did something that was rather interesting. He applied Trotskyism to world systems theory, where it was all about the global south. It was all about the third world. It was all about, this lowest kind of most oppressed nations in the entire world as the vehicle for the victory of international socialism. Whereas the Marxist-Leninist view was what? It was the second world, not the third world necessarily. Now, Mao has his own notion of three worlds theory, but the peculiar thing about that is that Mao obviously doesn't really just regard China as part of a global south. Mao understands China has a premier significance as far as the leadership of the revolutionary masses throughout the world. And so there's this kind of groundedness as far as Mao is concerned in a specific civilizational and national project, which was China. But the later that evolves into, that becomes interpreted as like a Maoist third worldism, right? And that kind of intersects with the Sam Marcy Trotskyism, which is a kind of vulgar, I don't know what to call it, third worldism, where Trotskyists are skeptical of nationalism, but if it's just the most oppressed nations that are patriotic and nationalistic, that's okay. We can forgive them because they will help facilitate the actual destruction of all patriotism in general, because theirs is only based on, the extent of their inequality with oppressor nations. So if you remove that oppression, we get the Trotskyite global revolution, basically. So that is Sam Marcy, more or less. It's Trotskyism as applied to world systems theory, which a lot of people find it easy. My reason is they confuse it for Marxism-Leninism, because Sam Marcy included within that kind of non-aligned global south, if you will, a lot of actually existing socialist states, including China, I think, at the time, right? But then after Deng Xiaoping, no. Now China enters the second world, and the Trotskyite Sam Marcy people are not fond of it. But in any case, that is where they're coming from. But that's not Marxism-Leninism. It's Trotskyism as applied to world systems theory. Now, I'll say something that I think is a little bit controversial. I think Marxism-Leninism as applied to world systems theory is a lot closer to something like Eurasianism. And by Eurasianism, I just mean this project for cultivating and developing alternative strongholds of an alternative global system, rather than principally just focusing on the disadvantaged status of like third world countries or global south countries. A strong emphasis is placed on an alternative global system, an alternative developmental paradigm. So that is like China. That's also Russia on the political front, right? And there's a big difference. Russia's a big, strong country. It's Carlito, what's up? Russia is not, a global south country. And yet Russia is at the fore of anti-imperialism on the political level globally. Right, so that's kind of the Marxist-Leninist perspective in contrast to the Trotskyite perspective. It's not to say Marxist-Leninists have anything against global south countries, especially ones that are fighting for their emancipation and liberation, but they don't have this condescending and belittling attitude according to which, oh yeah, you Venezuelans are just patriotic because of how oppressed you are, and we forgive you for it. You're just too stupid to be as advanced as us Trotskyites. Hopefully you can enter the ranks of us cosmopolitan Trotskyites and get it's very like patronizing. Whereas take the one country, Venezuela, like Marxyites will support Venezuela and will support Venezuela, but the content of the support is totally different. The Marxyites will be like, oh yeah, Venezuela, all of that Bolivarian stuff, that's just because you're like too stupid and you're too oppressed and you're not like us. One day you'll be as cosmopolitan as we are, but you're not just because you're oppressed. Now, our view is totally different. Our view actually takes Bolivarianism seriously, that this is a pole in South America, that this is a legitimate paradigm of human development. This is a legitimate paradigm of politics and geopolitics, and this is a real civilization that the Venezuelans are leading the construction of. This is something that could, in principle, right, rival Western society and civilization in that paradigm or whatever. Like rival it in terms of the military power and economic. I mean, obviously Venezuela is a very poor country, and it's not in the foreseeable future going to be stronger than the United States. But we believe Venezuela has the ability to challenge the United States in a fundamental way. Just like we believe the same for Iran or Russia, and the case of China speaks for itself. It's also true with Vietnam. We're not against Vietnam. We're not against Cuba. We just don't have this condescending attitude to them, according to which, we're not going to respect, according to which, that we won't respect their actual, we view them as equals. We don't view them as people under us. Does that make sense? Like, we don't view them, we don't patronize them and say, oh yeah, you guys are just doing that because you're oppressed. It's like, well, no, you're Vietnamese. You're proud of Vietnam. You're proud of your history. Vietnam has a very long history, and you want to fight for Vietnam. You're not just fighting inequality. You're fighting for Vietnam. That's our view of You're not just fighting against inequality. You're fighting for Venezuela. And it's both, obviously, we get that, but there's also a positive content of these projects that we are very much interested and invested and we respect as equals, We respect them as equals. We don't see them as below us or somehow, because of circumstance, they have to be dumber or less advanced than we are. So that is kind of the difference.